Yeah, no, it was helpful.
Actually, I haven't had a chance to go through it myself, but that's
Is
good.
everyone warm enough? I'm gonna open one or two.
That would be fine with me. I
Actually,
think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Oh, is the AC on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I turned the fan
Yeah,
on,
probably
but I'm not
is.
sure how well it's working.
Windows open probably isn't a bad idea anyway.
I always thought that
Fair enough.
that was half the battle, clear the air.
Right.
We just need to make sure that we close them when the meeting's over.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay.
Brian? Is that our sign?
Yeah,
Okay. I was looking around for it and did you pick it up at one point?
yeah, they had, it was a while ago.
Okay, gotcha.
Didn't touch it, open it.
Well, I guess we can take a look at it tonight.
We supposed to say distance?
I think it sounds like masks are strongly encouraged. And
Thank you.
other than that.
Run into your wife with a gaggle of little kids this afternoon.
Oh, doing the camp program?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking my dog out for a quick hoof.
I just sent the message that I hadn't heard, is maybe she didn't get tied to a tree or something. That was the end. Figured you might have to go through it at some point.
But I'd have to what?
I figured you might have to go through there at some point.
Yeah, well, we've been having to go up there to occasionally just politely remind people about the trail changes.
I think your granddaughter was there, Dick? The
Yes.
Tin Mountain program?
She's in the, just started, she's 5.
Yeah, Kathleen Maynard's.
Had a great day. Met a little girl in the parking lot that was kind of shy and wasn't sure if she wanted to leave her mom. And Ella went up and said, "Come on with me." And up the hill they went and
Oh, that's awesome.
it was fun.
Good.
My dog kept him entertained for a while.
Has anyone heard from Tom or Pam that they won't be making the meeting?
Tom will not be making.
Okay, gotcha.
He's on vacation.
Okay, that being the case, does that mean, Dick, that you would then, as an alternate member, be participating in tonight's meeting if Tom is not gonna make it?
I always hope to participate, but I would get to vote tonight.
Yeah, right, right.
I mean, that's the way it is, say, on the planning board.
Yep.
Join the
It's
table.
not there.
Yeah, Tom won't be here, so
So I
we
would
can
be
use an
a
alternate.
voting member of the conservation community.
Great. I haven't heard from Pam, but it is 6, so I guess we may as well go ahead and get started. I guess Hank is live streaming right now, so do you pass on comments and questions from
It's
anyone?
not enabled right now, so there will be questions tonight,
Okay, got it.
but it'll be live streaming though.
I see. All right, thanks. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It's interesting to be back in person. Feels pretty good in many ways. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started with review the minutes. I think tonight we just have the June minutes. And Will, would you be able to provide us with an update on the March and May minutes? Is there anything we can do to help with those?
The March minutes, I mean, on both sets of minutes, I've just not had much time to work on them. I mean, I've had a lot going on. The March minutes are almost done. The May minutes will still need a bit more work, but I'm going to do my absolute best to get them done for the next meeting because they've been pending for way too long.
Okay.
And I'm gonna have to make time to do them.
Okay, that sounds great. Feel free to let me know if you have questions or if you need help with anything.
All right, thank you.
So just the June minutes tonight. Take a couple minutes to review those. Any questions or comments or edits on those? Okay, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I wasn't there, so I won't make a motion.
Motion to approve.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Is there a second?
Second.
Brian seconds. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, minutes are approved. I think Julie did request that we take an official vote on the officers for 2021. I think we punted on that at the last meeting because it was a small crowd and Brian, your internet connection was coming in and out, so we were in and out of a quorum at that point. But the discussion generally was that I'm happy to continue serving as chair as long as it makes sense. And assuming that I don't at some point kind of move on from the idea of getting back into Jackson proper at some point, which I would like to do, but remain in the position of looking for a long-term housing situation. So I'm happy to keep doing it, but if anyone else is interested, feel free to say so, and I'll happily step aside as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and Brian, are you happy to continue serving as the vice chair?
Unless somebody else would like to.
I think you're doing a great job as vice chair, Brian.
Thanks.
Go, Brian.
Agreed. And Pam, I believe, is the clerk. I think at the last meeting she expressed that she was still willing to do that, clerk or secretary. So
Cool.
I guess my thought would be if we could have a motion to approve that slate of officers for 2021.
Do we have to do one by one, or do we just do them all at once?
I think we could do them all at once.
Great. I'll make a motion for Jeff to remain as chair, Brian to be vice chair, and Pam to retain as the secretary / clerk.
Second?
Okay. Any discussion or objection?
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, I think everyone's doing great.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I guess I don't know whether I can vote or not on that. All right, great. So the next item on the agenda is the review of the draft general management plan for Prospect Farm that Ken has kindly put together. I imagine you spent a fair amount of time on this. I know you have over the last several months, so thank you for putting that together and getting it ready for our review tonight. I haven't personally had a chance to go through it in depth. So Ken, I don't know if you want to kind of introduce it and lead the discussion.
First, I apologize for getting it out just early this morning, but I've been tied up like everybody else with a lot of other stuff. What I think we ought to focus in on is essentially, well, let me take a step back. This has been developed into 3 different sections. The first section is the background, which is going back through, and we've had a look at this part of the document before a number of times, which is the will of Mrs. Baker, the vote by the town. The will was donating the land to the town of Jackson as a park. The town accepted it in a vote as a recreation ground. And so the formation of this stewardship plan is based on both the intent of the donor as well as the vote that the town took when it took possession of this property. I have noted in the very beginning of this that we have a separate forest stewardship plan. It is noted here in this document that the forestry action should be secondary, not primary, relative to the management of Prospect Farm. At the same time, forestry could be used as a tool for recreation benefits and so on and so forth. So it's not saying forestry should not occur, and it's recommending that we follow much of the guidelines that were provided to us in the forestry plan that was updated in 2020 by Tim Nolan. So that's a little bit of the background. It then proceeds through and takes a look at some of the ordinances that have been passed by the town of Jackson that are relevant to Prospect Farm. It takes a look at the master plan of the town of Jackson to see which components are relative to Prospect Farm. And it takes a look also at the abutting landowners and what their policies are. And that's important for two reasons. One is some of the parking, et cetera, that's provided in the winter actually all happens on private land, which is the Valentine property, through a lease with the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. And in addition, when Mrs. Baker donated this land to the town, she also emphasized that she wanted it to basically be operated in conjunction with the Forest Reserve, which then, and that was coming out of the 1911 Weeks Act, which was called the Forest Reserve at that time, and then later becomes the White Mountain National Forest. So as I attempted to put together the policies about the management, it takes into consideration also that how we manage Prospect Farm, as much as possible, should take into consideration what the abutting landowners are also doing, so that when a user goes up there, there's some consistency what they're doing or not doing. Now, that's also based on the fact that when we did the questionnaire in December, there's quite a few people that go up and actually recreate on Prospect Farm, but they have no idea which property they're on, whether they're on Valentine's property, whether they're on Prospect Farm. And many of those folks are actually going out and recreating on the White Mountain National Forest. You only have to go a very short distance to get on to the Boggy Brook Trail, and you're on National Forest lands. And the same thing is true when you go out the Quail Trail. You go a very short distance, and then you're on National Forest property. And if you go up the Marsh Brook Trail, the down part of that trail is actually on the Valentine property. It's not on Prospect Farm. So the attempt here was to try to merge as best possible. There's going to be some contradictions here because here the recommendation will be to allow to continue hunting. However, Valentine does not allow hunting on his property. It's posted. So we can't make a perfect mix and match between the abutting landowners, but as best possible, this tries to take those into consideration, with a primary emphasis on the National Forest, because that's the way that the will was written in the intent of Mrs. Baker. Again, trying to stay in line with why the land was donated and how it was accepted, so that we honor the wishes of the town under those conditions as well as the donor. The second section, which is the part that we should go through this evening, is the policy recommendations. And then the third section is just general recommendations. And this is an attempt to take some of the prior discussions that we've had to see whether I've captured it properly or improperly. If you think that even if I've captured them properly and after further thought, you think we ought to change these, then we should do that as well. And if there's some additions that you think that should be added here, again, let us know, and then we can try to update this for the next discussion we have at the next meeting. I look at this, these recommendations that are here really as a first shot. Let's discuss them. Let's not take them as gospel. And some of them we might look at and just say, yeah, they're a no-brainer. Let's leave them. There's no need for change. Others we may say, let's give some more consideration and have further discussion at the next meeting. So that was the intent. I think always if you get a straw man version out there, it's much easier to have the discussion going forward. And then after we have sort of come to a conclusion where the Conservation Commission is on this plan, then we should approach the selectmen to go through with them. And once we've had that discussion with the selectmen, then I think our intention was to have an open public hearing so that people come in and discuss that as well, which is what we discussed, I think, a number of months prior. So is that a useful background? And then my recommendation, we go to the section about the recommendations here that we're making, the policy recommendations. We can just go through those real quick, which puts you on page, let's see. These are not page, but if you go to page 12, it says Recreation and Stewardship Management Policies and
Just really quick before we skip that beginning part, I
Yep.
just want to say thank you for doing it. I skimmed it this morning, and there's a lot of work, so thanks for doing all that. I felt like I learned a lot in reading some of the.
I learned a lot
history
putting it
and-
together.
Yeah, so just thank you for doing that part. I know we're skipping it, but I want to recognize that was not a quick process.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, on the forestry section, and I should note that you're gonna pick up, like I noticed as I started doing the A, B, C, D, E's, I forgot when I inserted it. So there's, some of those are a little messed up here in the order, but now is not the time to go in and do the fine editing. I think tonight it's just, do we have the concepts right? Do we have the right issues here correctly? And then moving forward. Okay, on forestry, the policy, and I'm not going to read this out loud, but essentially, says what I just said a few seconds ago, which is forestry should be secondary and subordinate to the purposes of Prospect Farm, per the wishes of the donor, as well as the reasons why the town accepted the property. I do want to note that forestry, I think, has been the major source of funding that has gone into the Baker Prospect Farm Trust, which is the monies that are being used. And if you recall the history that we went over way back, the selectmen in the 1960s went up and almost clear-cut most of Prospect Farm, which was bad because if you looked at the forest management plan that we have, they're still trying to rehabilitate it because of that extensive forestry that the town moved forward with in the 60s. However, the good side of that is it did help increase the amount of money that's available to do some of the management stuff, kiosks, those kinds of things that are out there. So there was a blessing in that. And essentially what this is saying is to follow the forest management plan as lined out in 2020 by Tim Nolan. For us, that was, we voted to accept that, if I'm correct. And, to follow the state's good forestry and the Granite State recommended voluntary best management practices, so on and so forth. And that all monies derived from the forestry operation should continue to go into the Baker Trust Fund. And then forestry operations on the abutting private inholdings of White Mountain National Forest are actually accessed by roads that go through Prospect Farm. It's my understanding, and Dick, you may have a better history than I on this, but usually there is coordination between the selectmen and the White Mountain National Forest before they do get permission to go in. And it does have some ramifications because normally the best time to do your forest activities is in the winter. The highest use that's occurring at Prospect Farm is in the winter. And if you're doing forestry, you lose your cross-country skiing. And in years past, the Ski Touring Foundation has come to a silent agreement with the National Forest. If they're going to log, if they're doing Bog Brook, then they're not doing it quail at the same time. So that a section of that is still open to be used by users up there. But I think as much as possible, it really should be encouraged that the forestry actions happen there in the non-winter season as best practical. Again, for the simple reason is that's when the highest use is up there. Now, I would point out also, in my understanding and going back through the records, is that the the three abutting properties, one is the Lyons property, which is the 100-acre inholding. Then you have the Valentine property, which abuts it, and then the bulk of it is abutted by the National Forest. The Lyons property, from the way that I understand the records here, does not actually touch the Class 6 road that goes up there. However, if I'm reading the state statutes correctly, the owner does have the right to do timber activity and must come to an agreement with the selectmen as to how he can get his timber out. There was a proposal to actually develop that 100-acre parcel into mini lots, mini camp lots. It was contested by the town, went to the Superior Court, and then the owners of the property at that time withdrew it at the last minute. And the town's attorneys interpreted that to mean that they were correct, that he could not proceed ahead to develop and use, develop special roads and so forth to get in to do that kind of development. So the Lyons property has been managed for forestry, does have the right to get some access out. That was the Orchard Trail The very last part of the Orchard Trail is actually on Lyons property. It's not on Prospect Farm if you look at the maps. And Dick, I don't know whether, you know, you may have been closer to some of the history that I just outlined here as to whether I got it right, partially right.
No, you're right on.
Okay. So that's the proposal with forestry, big picture. And if people have any further discussion, otherwise I would just suggest that we do the head nodding but not doing a formal vote on each one of these right now, but to go through the whole thing. So any further thoughts, discussions on forestry?
Well, the only thing I'm thinking is that if we go in to do forestry, I don't think there's going to be much anytime soon. They go in the winter because it's less, it's easier for them to do it, and it's less of a burden on the animals and that sort of thing.
I think the primary reasons why logging is preferred in the winter is because erosion is the primary challenge in a logging operation. And when you can skid stuff out over the snow, there's less erosion that can come about from the skid rows and so on and so forth. So that's, frozen ground is the best time. Like spring when the soils are real wet is the worst time to do a logging operation. That's a simple generalization, but that's normally, but that's not to say that forestry does not happen in the non-winter time, because you can go to any of the commercial forestry lands around here and they log pretty much outside of the wet mud season.
With the kind of cut-to-length technology, you can get a lot of smaller vehicles back in, so it's not, but you're right, I mean, it's pretty much, you want the ground to be frozen, but if you use cut-to-length, then typically your vehicles are a little smaller, and you don't need to put you don't need to put a skid road in and things like that.
If you have a dry summer like we've had, you can safely forest, you know, even in fairly wet areas. If it's a wet summer, it's going to be a challenge, basically.
I don't see much forestry, timbering, I should say, coming up anytime soon. How much, but they've done so much.
I think on Tim's proposal, and I'd have to go back and look at it again, he does have some recommendations, because again, some of it is to try to do forestry to recover from the 1960s clear cutting that happened. You know, it's not unusual after a clear cut, you just get a whole mass of young small stuff out there. And if I recall correctly, I think he was suggesting some thinning and stuff. But I'd have to go back and look at it, but yeah.
When I talked to Tim Nolan when he was first coming up with the plan for, the last plan that he did, one of the inputs was that it should be managed for mature trees.
Yeah.
I hope that is passed over, because like any community, you need diversity. You can't just have the old folks. You really need some of everything. So I don't think that is a management technique that would be applicable to manage for mature trees. We're going to get mature trees. You know, you give them a chance and they're going to come along nicely. But you need all stages of growth to have a healthy forest. So I hope that becomes the goal of the forestry management aspect of it.
And I think some of it is there, because you do have, like where the viewpoint is when you go up on the Hall's Ledge Trail, you know, to maintain that small grassy area, and then you have a bunch of shrubby stuff that's coming up that probably should be cut back. There's going to be a section there that would be earliest succession, for the simple reason is you want a fairly big area cleared and kept low for the view itself. So I think there are areas where that's going to be accomplished. I do think, though, that when you look at the surrounding national forest, a lot of it is early to mid-succession. So Prospect Farm is actually surrounded by a fair amount of early to mid-succession. What is actually absent in a lot of that area is older, larger trees, just because of the Lyons property was logged pretty heavily. And, well, Ballantyne, I don't believe, has logged his property. Of course, all of that area was field at one time.
The Fan Brook logging too.
Yeah,
At the end of-
yeah.
We took out all the big mature trees out.
So I think in you know, response to yours, Dick, is I concur with you. But I think you gotta look beyond the small 450 acres here, because there is a lot of surrounding that's doing some of what I think you're discussing.
I think one of our advantages is that we never have the pressure, the financial pressure. We never have to log this for the money.
Yeah.
It's great that we get some income for it. It funds the Prospect Farm, you know, any of the ideas that come up. But we don't have to, you know, cut for financial reasons cover it. So, you know, that's really an advantage that, you know, if they have a proposed cut and it's a bad year, well, we can put it off for 5 years and it doesn't make a bit of difference.
Right. And I know Don had done some of that cutting for, you know, wildlife habitat as well. So, you know, trying to create areas for grouse and food for the beavers. And so I haven't looked over. The newest one is as deeply as I understood Don, so I'm sure in there is some about regeneration for animals, for wildlife. But I think what you were saying is to not turn Prospect into the goal of it being an old growth forest, effectively, and just not just a place where it's just old trees.
It's going to take a while.
Yeah,
it's going to take a while.
I mean, you
We'll
can't make it old
retirement
growth, but just for the
community.
term of, you know, ancient.
But you might have patches. That might be what you're talking about too, diversity.
Yeah.
So you might have an area where you say don't cut, and then it will be old growth.
Oh, there's some beautiful cedar trees in
But I think it would be worth our time just to go back and look at the forestry management plan.
Yeah.
Because I think the plan that Tim put forward is not a no-cut plan.
No.
Right.
It's got a mixture in there.
It seemed limited for the next 10 or 15 years, but that's a relatively short time period when it comes to forestry.
Yeah.
And I guess that was going to be one of my questions, is whether there are specific things that we want to pull out of that and into this general management plan to kind of highlight as our, you know, those are the recommendations that are made within the forest management plan. And for the most part, we agree with following that forest management plan. These are the specific things from there that we think make sense or don't make sense. And so I don't know if we.
Well, that's option one. Option two is, because we did vote to accept his, what this is doing is essentially referring to that document as opposed to, I mean, I started off adding all that stuff and then I realized this is going to be a 60 or 70 page document. And once it gets to be a 60 or 70, how many people are actually going to read it? And so then I said it makes more sense just to refer to the original document than it is to repeat. And I think we have the option in the forestry management plan to determine how, when, and where, because his recommendations are there. So that was the rationale I had here.
Yeah.
Because I do think, you know, from a practical purpose, once a document gets too big, it almost becomes useless.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think acknowledging that there's some discretion in applying that forest management plan, even if it's not specifically spelled out in this.
Right, because he's simply a recommendation, just like we're recommending board.
Well, these are policies. I mean, I did this into two levels. One is, these are the policies, because some of these are going to be very specific about thou shalt can or thou shalt not be able to. What this is saying here is we accept the forestry management plan, and the intention is to follow it. We don't see it contradictory to the purposes of, but it is still subordinate to the recreational needs.
Is there a time limit or window that this plan applies to? I feel like the forestry management plan had a lot of very short-term goals that were related to. So is that like a decade-based or looking? Or?
Yeah, what I might suggest on that, Ben, because that's an excellent point, would be essentially let's go through and determine whether these are the right things.
Okay.
And then I think we ought to build a timeline. But I didn't do that at this step for the simple reason is we don't know whether we're all buying into what's here or not. But I do think that a timeline so that we have something to sort of ask ourselves, are we actually meeting what we put forth, or are we not? And some of these are just policies, they're not timeline driven, but some like signage out at Prospect Farm, which needs to be updated. You know, that's here, it's made as a recommendation. I don't have a timeline on it, but we should put a timeline on it.
Right, or just that, where we say that we're deferring to the forest management plan, which gets renewed every so often, so those goals are would be referred to in that document rather
Yep.
than tying specific goals in the general plan here. I guess if that's
Yeah.
the intended goal. Okay.
I think that would be a good addition. Next is natural ecosystems and wildlife. And if you go through Tim Nolan's report, he touches on, in a precursory way, because that's not what he was hired to do, but there's never really been a good inventory of the natural resources that we have. At least to my knowledge, I couldn't find one. And this recommendation here is to hire somebody like Rick Van de Hol, somebody like that, who's very knowledgeable, does this, to go in and do a complete inventory, because there may be some natural resources out there that are actually of outstanding characteristics, but we're just totally ignorant of them. And, you know, Tim's report goes through and he notices stuff about, you know, moose have been in browsing in this area and so on and so forth. But Tim did not go through and look for like rare and endangered species, that type of thing. He wasn't hired to do that. And that sort of action has never been done. So this basically is making a recommendation that at some point we hire a professional ecologist who does this to go through and do an inventory. I don't think it's too complicated or too expensive, but that's the recommendation.
Rick would be good because he just did the Dundee one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Vernal ponds on there too? Vernal pools?
What's that?
Do they not like inventory vernal pools?
Yeah, I mean, so he would go through and probably go through any of the communities and habitats, you know, and then he'd like list those. Like there's that book in New Hampshire, like 120 different natural communities in New Hampshire. So you'd go through and identify those and then put down, you know, endangered or threatened species, anything unique, and, you know, spend a lot of time bushwhacking around. That's typically how they, I mean, not always, but they'll organize it by natural community.
And many towns that have town properties will have a natural resource inventory done, which, as I said, to my knowledge, there's never really been a comprehensive. There's been some spotty stuff. Thoughts on that?
I think that's a good recommendation.
All right.
Yeah.
Next is the Stump Dump. And this is an interesting thing because I was unable to make the last selectmen's meeting. But I did go back and watch the Zoom meeting afterwards when I had a chance. The Skunk Dump that's up there, when I plowed through the town records, it was very controversial when it was put up there. And, you know, I did my PhD thesis on invasive species. Tim Nolan has made the same recommendation that anybody that has, you know, sticking something where you can import invasive species into the headwater regions is the wrong thing to do. We already have knotweed that's been introduced. It has been knocked back because the town did do a chemical treatment, but you can still find some fronds coming up right now. And, you know, with the drainage ditches, et cetera, that are up on those roads, that's a perfect place for it to just spread like crazy out of there. The selectmen did bring it up and voted to continue the Stump Dump up there at their last meeting. That doesn't mean that we should recommend, that we have to take that recommendation. I don't think they're fully knowledgeable about the threats that exist up there currently. But when you import soils like that, if you're doing an operation on the National Forest, like when Jackson Ski Touring Foundation does its trails, all of its machinery has to actually be checked to make sure that it doesn't have any invasives. That will also spread into the National Forest for where that Stump Dump is right now. Again, because of the way your drainage ditches are along those roads, etc. You know, this is just, we have plenty of knotweed problems in the town. this is the worst place to have it, is up in the headwaters. This recommendation here basically says the same thing that Tim Nolan says, is, you know, stump dumps, because of all the soils you're bringing in, you have no idea on what's in them. That should be closed and moved out of there. So this recommendation essentially has that recommendation to sit down with the selectmen and see if the town is going to still offer this as something that townspeople can use. Really should look at a different site.
So-
This is the worst site.
But were there a bunch of people that came to that meeting who were in support of keeping the stump dump? I thought I read that.
There was one or two individuals that said that they were still using it. There's also concern that came out of that meeting. The stump dump is close to being filled if you go up there. Now, a little bit later on, we're gonna get around to parking issues there. I mean, I go up there very frequently in the summer, so I get to see what the use is, but the current parking lot that's up there is filled to capacity much of the time. Cars are backed up to the turn, etc. My recommendation, we'll get to it in just a second, would be to ask the Forest Service to move their gate out to the actual boundary, because the gate is actually on Prospect Farm property. And I believe it was put on the Prospect Farm property so that it would be gated and people could not get to the stump dump unless they had approval from the town. Dick, is that your understanding?
Yeah, and I had put forward the idea that we just close it because I talked to Fred Henry and Dean Davis and they didn't see any reason to keep it open.
Yeah, and I can't remember, there were one or two people who did contact Frank.
But it isn't required by the town. Hey, there's nothing that says the
Right.
town of Jackson has to provide a stump.
And with it almost being full, then the issue becomes what? But, you know, my recommendation would be to move the gate out and then make that into a second parking lot.
So the gate would move more towards Camp Out?
No,
Or inwards
it moves
towards
out
the-
to the actual boundary, which is
Yeah.
about 700 feet out from where it is actually, and goes to where the actual
So
boundary,
it goes up the road?
goes up Boggy
Up
Brook.
to the, okay.
That is correct, yeah. And I forgot to bring, did I bring it with me? I did not. If you take a look at the map that Tim Nolan put together, which was updated, you can see where it's marked where the stump dump is, where the gate is currently, and so on and so forth. So, getting back to the stump dump, does this make sense?
Yeah. I don't see any reason for it.
Well, we made the recommendation before, I think, to close the stump dump.
We did,
I don't
Yeah.
think that changes.
I think
And-
that was communicated to
yeah.
the
But it might,
select board.
so it might be a matter of, basically informing the select board more.
Yeah,
Because I thought I read the minutes, and I thought they said that and I could be wrong, that they thought they had to have a stump dump for some reason.
that has been said, but I mean, I'm not the lawyer, but I did plow back through. I don't think that the town is required by state law to provide a stump dump. I mean, there's stuff that I also picked up. It's in the preamble here that people said that, in fact, the town moderator, one of the old selectmen, one of the old annual meetings, the town moderator gets up and says the Prospect Farm was just given to the town for just the residents of Jackson. When you read the history of Mrs. Baker's donation and the fact that she wasn't a resident, she gave it to her son, he wasn't a resident, and she wanted it integrated with the White Mountain National Forest use, it would be hard to interpret it the way that, but people say stuff that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And I think the stump dump one may be in that category as well.
Yeah, I thought we had looked into it last year when we initially talked about it after getting the forest management plan, and it was either an obligation or just an expectation that stumps would be disposed of on the site that they were removed from. I guess my only other question as an aside is, and this touches on something else we talked about at the last meeting, is whether anyone knows if the town does allow disposal of vegetation and stumps at the transfer station.
What do you mean vegetation?
Okay, so clipping and stuff like that.
Yeah, under 4 inches?
Yeah, 4 or 5 inches in diameter.
Gotcha.
That's for the burn pit?
Yeah, for the burn pit.
Okay. But yeah, I remember having looked into it and seeing something that said they were to be disposed of on site, and that there wasn't an obligation on the part of the town to provide a stump dump. So my memory matches.
I mean, it's one thing if you're moving stumps from a forest harvestry operation on Prospect Farm, because you're essentially just rearranging soils on the locale. But obviously the knotweed got brought up there by stumps that were brought with foreign soil into that area.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to include.
Next one is signage. The policy recommendation here is to essentially update the kiosk that's up there. The one thing that I think is missing on that kiosk is what are the regulations for Prospect Farm? And I believe actually when you go back and you look at when the Betty Whitney started the Conservation Commission in 1969, Conservation Commission made a series of recommendations that were voted in 1972, which was to post the regulations. It's nice to have them posted on the town website, but for users that are coming in, and particularly if they're from out of town, they don't get to see what they, so I think there is a need to update that map. You know, Tim Nolan's map is a great start to that, and then in addition, I think we could integrate a little bit more of the history into that kiosk as well as what the regulations are. So this policy recommendation is the educational signage. Okay, I get a lot of head nodding, so we'll move on. The next is motorized vehicle and parking access. The town, is it 2020, I can't remember, passed an ordinance on Class 6 roads. And that ordinance, I think, incorporated the needs of Prospect Farm at that time because it was give and take about, there's a number of Class 6 roads like the Davis family wanted to make sure that they could still access their Hazelton pasture properties and so on and so forth. But relative to Prospect Farm, the ordinances, if I'm interpreting this correctly, essentially allow you to get up to where the gates are. And the Class 6 roads, it's a little confusing as to what is and isn't, but my understanding of the Class 6 road is it starts at the last house where it turns to dirt road, and then it actually goes all the way up to where the Halls Ledge Lookout is. I believe that's the true Class 6 road. The spur roads, Quail and Boggy Brook, are actually Forest Service roads. They're not Class 6 roads. And they were built collaboratively with the town, but they're not. But some maps, when you look in the town thing here, I think they show part of the spurs there as Class 6, but I don't believe that they're truly Class 6 roads. My understanding is the true Class 6 road is the one that goes all the way up to the Halls Ledge Lookout.
Yeah, exactly. I imagine the town would have to adopt those roads otherwise. The Forest Service builds it, you don't have to, it wouldn't be considered Class 6.
Yeah, I didn't go through all the MOUs, but there are MOUs between the town and the Forest Service. And it's, I think for the most part, from what I could interpret, is those are fairly good collaborative MOUs between the two entities. But the recommendations here are essentially to continue the ordinances which say that in the winter, you cannot get up through unless you're going to access your property. Now, Prospect Farm actually starts where Camp Gallup is, Camp Gallup. And I have trouble understanding Camp Gallup. When I look at the tax records, it shows it as a building but no land, which in all the land surrounding it is Ballantyne's property. So my interpretation is there's some agreement between the landowner and Ballantyne, and it's not unusual that the owner of the building, if they've got a lease or something, would still be responsible for the taxes. But the short version is everything around Camp Gallup is actually Ballantyne's property until you hit the true boundaries of Prospect Farm.
So that's why you're saying there's only one abutter.
No, actually that's correct, because the building.
Building on land of another, that's the technical
Right,
term.
right. And then, of course, your other abutters, such as the National Forest, etc., But the way that the ordinance is written is if there's emergency purposes or somebody wants to go up and they've shot a moose or a deer or whatever and want to drive up and get it, they can come to the selectmen, get the key, and go get it. And that's the way that the ordinance is currently written. So my recommendation here is essentially we adopt the ordinance that exists right now relative to when that road is open or not open to the public and where.
And that ordinance is a class 6 road, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, it also has to do with the two spurs, because you can go out a short distance on Quail, and you can go out a short distance on Bog Brook. And then so those are actually on the town's property. When you hit the gates, with the understanding the Bog Brook gate is, the boundary is actually 700 feet out further from where it is currently. Out, it's just out immediately past where the Stump Dump is. And then the recommendation on the parking is in the winter, in the summer, there's the small 6-car parking lot. The Forest Service moved the trail access off Valentine's property at Valentine's request. The town and the Forest Service came to agreement to build that small 6-car parking lot where it's currently located, and it was located there. This is my interpretation of the history, because the Stump Dump was further up and they wanted the gate to control the Stump Dump. So it got built on the town's Prospect Farm land as opposed to actually on Forest Service land. But then that serves the Forest Service's Bog Brook, Wildcat Valley trails, and so on and so forth as they go up. As I mentioned, I get up there frequently. I don't know how many others do. That parking lot in the summer is frequently full to capacity, and more so. You get a lot of people who are hiking up to the Scenic overlook, which is pretty dramatic. Up at the first one is you get to Hall's Ledge, the one that looks down over the valley. And you get a lot of people who are parking and just walking their dogs, predominantly out onto the Forest Service Bog Brook Road Trail. And you get families up there actually mountain biking with their kids because it's safer than doing, young kids in particular, because it's safe, away from the roads and so on and so forth. So there is a need for some summer parking up there. You can park at the Valentine property, parking lot that Jackson has, that obviously is on private. There's a number of folks that do, particularly if they want to access up through Marsh Brook, and because you can take the spur trail off for that view off to Mount Washington if you've been up through there and so on and so forth. But the summer use up there is up considerably since I moved here. And I don't know.
Use it to access Carter to stay at the hut.
Huh?
Use it to access Carter to stay at the hut.
I don't think there's high volume because you don't see many overnight cars parked there. But there is a little bit of that. And there's a handful of folks that go up there to just fish for wild, little small native brook trout and wildcat in that upper section as well. So the recommendation here is to expand the parking where the Stump Dump is and have the Forest Service gate moved out.
What would we estimate that could fit where the Stump Dump is? Has anybody given that?
I looked at it, and it depends on how you want to go up there and plow the stumps out of the way. The shelf is there already. And it's a question of what do you do with the stumps? Do you just push them to the side and call it a parking lot?
Windbreak.
I would guess that you could probably do 6 to 8 cars.
Right. Okay, I didn't know if you were going to say like 20. Whoa.
No.
Yeah.
But it is recognizing that.
Roughly doubling the size.
Yeah.
Which is pretty high.
Yeah. And you get a lot of people go up and walk their dogs. They
Yeah.
park, they walk out of Park Brook and they come
I'd
back.
say there's usually 4 or 5 cars in the lot and then 3 or 4 overflow.
Yeah.
And then I parked at Valentine yesterday. I didn't even look. I just said, oh, I want a Valentine.
That's what I do all the time.
Yeah.
I don't
Like,
know
why would I
to
even
the-
have to worry?
I didn't know, and I don't know if it's here or in that last section 3, but when I was thinking about this, I kind of feel like it's possible to basically pull this section out, because when I think about it, I see this as like the #1 challenge that the town's going to face in managing Prospect Farm. over the next like 10 to 15 years. It's just parking.
Oh, Jackson Falls.
Yeah, with Jackson Falls, and I just feel like it's going to be with at Prospect. This is going to be the biggest issue and the biggest hurdle. And so I don't know if there's a way to just to like pull this out a little bit, and whether it's putting it in section 3 or somewhere else, and just saying like this really like is an issue that should be addressed now, because if we don't address it now, it'll be Jackson Falls and
Yeah.
5-10 years. And with the I think it's awesome to do that with the summer, and for the winter one, I don't know how we would do this, but I would love to recommend the town to like try and engage a third party to run a show in the winter. I just feel like if there's like that would be my recommendation, is get the town to try and engage with a third party who would run a show. And I don't know.
The Ski Touring Foundation has done that, and it has not proven, it has been proven to be a money sink.
Really?
Not even close to break even. The Ski Touring Foundation has had some casual conversations with Valentine about potentially expanding that lot. Understanding that you probably don't want to expand that into like a 200-car parking lot because of the volume of traffic that would be headed up there. I think you.
The road.
Yeah.
Well, you get the same thing as we have at Jackson.
Yeah,
I mean, the more you provide and promote, the more you get, and the impact becomes detrimental.
And the experience isn't.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, currently in the winter, that's a 29-car parking lot. And then just below Johnny White's is the pullout that's actually on the property that Holcomb's donated to the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. And you can probably get another 10 cars plus.
Yeah.
In the winter, both of those are full.
Yeah.
When there's low snow down here, those fill up. When there's adequate snow down here, then the parking is less of an issue up there. I know wearing my Jackson Ski Touring Foundation is, potentially you might be able to increase that parking lot by 10 or 15 cars. But then you have constraints on the property. It's really a question of whether Valentine is going to permit that or not. And, then Jackson would have to come up with the money to expand that parking lot as well. But currently, the plan is that the Valentine parking lot will only be for pass holders. If somebody wants to hike through, like up to Carter Notch or something, then they can use Jackson's Holcomb property lot. But because Jackson is paying for all of the cost of construction, sanding, plowing, because the town is not providing any parking in the winter. That's all gratis. Ski touring, but ski touring gets the benefit because, they groom it and they can offer it out to their season member passes, and that's just part of the agreement between the town and the Ski Touring Foundation. But I think the one area that we do see in the summer is word overflow right now, and it goes back onto Valentine's property because people park in that little spur across from the etc. And we're pushing it down to, there's goodwill with Valentine now, but good can become bad if it becomes too much of a challenge.
Definitely keep it up.
Yeah. So the concept here would be to expand where you already have the footprint of a shelf for a parking lot.
I guess my feeling would be this, like Mike said, this might be a good one to highlight at a public hearing that we might have. Just because I feel like when I think back to that survey that we sent out, the parking was one of the things that people had most comments on.
Lack thereof,
pretty
full.
Yeah, either that or I think there was a lot of increased parking. There was also a lot of keep it as is because as you increase it, there's more use. So
I just don't know if there's a way to just there's a lot of recommendations in here, but like here's the one that like don't glaze over this one. Like this is the one to really pay attention to, and I don't
I mean, my observation in the summer is that you're not at what I would label as social capacity. The environmental impact of the use in the summer, I think, is pretty minimal because most of it is happening on roads.
Mm-hmm.
It's not penetrating into where there's sensitive resources, most of that activity. You know, it's kind of like you harden a trail, you can run 500 people to 5,000. If it's a hardened trail, it doesn't make any difference.
Well, I think the other part of that is Valentine tends to use that property during the summer, spring and fall.
He does.
I've talked to him a bunch, and I just try to be sensitive and
Yep.
pretend like if I was where he is. I mean, right now he's chosen to be in a spot that's close to the road, so yes, but I've definitely picked up that he's noticed that, wow, it gets kind of busy up here, you know, and so just with that thought in mind, I thought like, well, we definitely want to find a way to keep him happy and not feel like, hey, are we promoting my neighbor, my driveway into being something, you know, maybe more than what he thought it was ever going to be. That's another part that, to me, I feel like we can't really control that because anyone can post anything they want, and it's great that more people are getting out, and it's a beautiful place. But again, you have to be careful that, not even from the environmental aspect of it, just the landowner could just be like, this place is just like overwhelming.
Well, I think if you add like 6+ car, it actually draws people to park up there more.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean,
Well,
I, like you notice a lot of times that lot's full, sometimes I'll just park. But that means now I'm moving right in front of where he's parked his trailer.
Yeah, it's maybe
But-
one day we should sit down with him and just really feel
Yeah.
him out and just say, hey, what can we do to make sure that
Yeah.
you're taken care of and any of these decisions that we're making with best interest for everybody. But he might say, you know what, in 5 years I plan on getting myself up here. This corner, don't worry about it, just keep, let's just keep
Yeah.
people healthy and honest.
That's a really good idea to bring them into it.
Yeah, and just to say, we're thinking of, like, we're feeling this is happening, and we want to make sure that you're not just biting your teeth going like, why did I let people use this place? Now that this is nice, of course you want to come there. It's like if people find out there's no bugs in New Hampshire, everybody'd be here, but
A lot of ticks.
yeah, the ticks are getting horrible.
My sense is that there'd be less controversy, maybe less discussion over the idea of expanding parking in the summer to the Stump Dump area, and maybe more discussion to be had around the idea of expanding parking for the winter, although I guess I'm not exactly sure how much the town and the public would be involved in that decision.
Right. I mean,
Anyway.
It's not even on our land. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, that's Valentine's final decision. The Ski Touring Foundation, I think he actually approached, I wasn't in on the conversation, so I won't push it one way or the other, or my understanding, but there is the possibility that you could do a minor expansion on the existing parking lot. I don't think that the Ski Touring Foundation is looking at how do we make this a 200 car. I think you're looking at maybe another 10 cars or so. And I've gone up and looked at the site. You can't really go to the north because there's a drainage that comes down. You could come to the south, where that big rock is where they put the piston buoy. I think you could reasonably get in there. Ironically, the land opposite on the other side is actually owned by the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. But the conservation easements, the interpretation by the society is that you can put ski trails on that, but you can't put infrastructure, which is parking, which is kind of ironic, but otherwise the Ski Touring Foundation would not have put it on Valentine's property, they would have put it on their own property. But because the way that the land went to the Ski Touring Foundation, already had that easement, that's the way that the terms are. But it is ironic that the Ski Touring Foundation owns the land now via a donation on the other side, but can't use it for that purpose. I don't know that it makes sense for the Prospect Farm Stewardship Plan to be determining what Valentine wants to do on his property. I think we get into a little bit of a dangerous thing there. We do cite here the relationships of Ski Touring Foundation, and it's through his good graces and Jackson Ski Touring Foundation's good graces that there is winter parking up there.
yeah, no, I don't think we should dictate by any means what happens on his property, but yeah, it does say, well, I guess what would it mean for the town to accommodate efforts by the Ski Touring Foundation?
Basically, I think the role here would be that the Conservation Commission, if the Ski Touring Foundation and Valentine came to an agreement of like increasing by 10, that would be an accommodation. Again, I don't think the Ski Touring Foundation nor the land is going to allow you to do a lot much more. You might be able to increase that by a third at the best. And if you build it out, it's going to fill.
Jeff, are you saying that, I'm not seeing. where
It's
you-
the last paragraph in that section. First sentence.
Can accommodate efforts. Okay, yeah, I see it. I can see how that could be interpreted.
And maybe your recommendation, Jeff, is just strike that.
Maybe, I mean, if the town and the public don't really have a say in it anyway,
Well, yeah, I think, I'm not gonna say, but maybe what I'm thinking, what you might be thinking is that because this is the Conservation Commission's document, that does sound like maybe we're the part where it says the town, meaning that somehow we're
Managing
that as
outside our
well.
property.
Yeah, I
Right.
can see that. I mean, I think, I don't disagree with that statement, but I could see how if you want to disagree with something, that might stir the pot.
mhm.
It might be that sometimes you put things in writing and sometimes you just talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that as strike it. Any other comments on this section? Motorized recreation use. This gets a little confusing, but I think in Tim Nolan's report, he basically points out that, because of the steepness and a lot of the soils up there are pretty wet, you get a lot of perched water table, which is not unusual for this terrain around here, that like ATVs, et cetera, just don't make sense. I know that there's been requests in the past, but this basically says that motorized recreational vehicles shall be prohibited. And here, this would require actually to undo a town vote. Because in 1972, when the Conservation Commission came through, they basically said that snowmobiling would be permitted, but only if they developed a separate trail system from the ski trail system. Then the town later votes to prohibit snowmobiling up there. And then by petition, by a narrow vote, a number of years later, snowmobiling gets voted back in. Now there's several challenges with snowmobiling up there. One is the abutting landowner, Valentine, says no to motorized recreation. The White Mountain National Forest, all of the lands that are surrounding that, even though snowmobiling is allowed on parts of the White Mountain, those management units do not recognize snowmobiling. So that means, and then the third issue would be is Jackson Ski Touring Foundation is not going to want a bunch of trailers, because when somebody brings a snowmobile up, frequently it's with a trailer, it's going to occupy a huge space. And there's also a safety issue, because for people skiing up, and particularly because there's a lot of dog skiing there, skiing down the Wildcat Valley Trail with a snowmobile coming up is not a good formula relative to common sense safety. So this essentially is recommending that this parcel is too small to make common sense for snowmobiling. You can take your snowmobile over to Town Hall Road and snowmobile to your heart's content in the Maine, wherever else you want to go. But there's no trail system up there. There's no logical parking up there for snowmobiling. So this recommendation is to undo that former vote.
You'd almost have to stay at Camp Gout, have a snow machine there, and to use it, because there's no place to go.
Yeah, exactly.
on 400 and whatever acres, there's no place to go. Snow, from what I know, I've been on a snow machine once, it was great fun. But it's how many miles you can put down. I was up in Pittsburgh and it's about, going 30 miles,
Yeah.
up to the Canadian border and back.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, it is. I mean, it's a winter dirt bike.
Or you can go up Hurricane Mountain Road and over and up Evans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's
It's-
pretty things to do, but it's not there. I don't think the impact is going to really come up. It seems that, I think at the most, it would be some rabbit hunter that wanted to go up in there in the winter or something like that. I just don't know what the impact would be.
There's a few people that are they'll hold on to it.
'Cause
They've
they don't-
never
they don't
brought
think
the
to
snowmobile
change.
up there, but they like to talk about it when they will, but they never show up.
I think the other thing that could be referenced here, because yeah, there might be a few people that show up and make that point, but when we sent the survey around, whether it was Jackson residents or not, the
There's a strong
consensus was that
Yeah.
they didn't want motorized vehicles up there. There were maybe one or two people that said
And it would be
yes.
a huge conflict with what the bulk of
Right.
people up there.
Right.
Yeah.
There's, I think
But no motorized, how does that impact ski touring?
Ski touring can only use motorized relative to grooming, and that is recognized and needs
Is
to
that, it better end up in writing because
Yeah.
It's in section D. It took me a minute to figure that out too. In section D, it says motorized vehicles are for emergency purposes, cross-country trail grooming or forestry, and this is recreational use.
Yeah.
So it took me a minute, I saw that as well, and I was like, oh, it doesn't have, but it does. It's in the section above it.
Would it make sense to include some of the, I don't know, the fact that a certain percentage, whatever it would have been, 95% of people who responded to a survey
Yeah,
suggested that they're
I did not, one of the appendices here was gonna be the questionnaire, and then the
Mhm.
question is, what parts? Because there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Again, you don't want this appendix to be a long ways, but I think we might be able to capture it in the appendix there and reference it.
Yep.
Yeah, it might just say the appendix about, that area.
Yep.
Is the poll responses, that survey, is that still like a live link?
I don't think so.
So I don't know if you could just, well, rather than have it be a, 30-page appendix, you could just put the link on there. Like I said, I don't know how long that lives for.
Yeah. Let's go and check. I don't know that you can still go on and enter in a response to that survey, but I mean, all of the information is saved electronically,
Yeah.
so.
That's what I mean, yeah, just to reference it versus putting it, like all of it in here, you could link to it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, convert it into a PDF. It could be on the Conservation Commission page,
Yeah, right.
the same as Tim Nolan's report is, and so on and so forth. Maybe the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, biking. Policy is no motorized biking is permitted, is limited to the logging, access and class 6 roads, trail systems. And then this was just based, I think, because we had a preliminary conversation. Motorized pedal/hand crank assist e-bikes by handicapped people on the class 6 road would be permitted. I should note that it's not permitted on the National Forest lands. I did check the regs.
What is not?
Like e-assist.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
They're still trying,
Oh, e-assist.
they're still trying to figure out where they are on that. But that's currently, when it's gated, is no motorized.
So I didn't know, I agree with that entirely, like I think people that are, have mobility issues should be able to use a pedal assist up there, but I didn't know if by putting that down, if that opens up some sort of weird enforcement thing, like, I don't know, because it's like, then it's like, oh, do you have a mobility issue? Like, are you allowed to be on that
Are you
bike?
handicapped? Where's your little?
Yeah, like, do you have a
little
tag in your
sign?
car? Like, I mean, not that I think anyone's gonna be there checking, or anyone's gonna see this and be like, oh, here's my chance to go up there and do this.
Right.
But I just didn't know, like, does that open up anything by like
It does.
specifically
I-
having that one exception, but then no real way to kind of enforce that?
I mean, I can think of somebody who was an avid mountain biker, Peter Minich, who did many of the mountain bike trails, etc. And now he pretty much has to use an e-bike.
Yeah.
I mean, he's aged and he's got health issues and he uses an e-bike.
I thought we had decided it was a certain level of e-bike that we accepted, and then beyond that, we said absolutely not, absolutely not.
That's a
We
good
could
one.
do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think
There's the class one, you know,
yeah,
there's,
I thought we did because I think we kind of realized, hey, if you can,
Does it
You
have
basically-
carburetor or, is it carburetor or clutch, whatever?
hand
Throttle.
throttle.
I mean, I'm familiar with it. Essentially, there's three different categories. I mean, there may be subcategories to those. One is it's just pedal assist. To get the motor to work, you have to be pedaling.
Mhm.
The second is it's pedal assist, but you also can hand throttle it so that you're using it without any pedaling whatsoever. Then the third is essentially you have an electronic motorcycle, and not only can you only use it with a hand throttle, but you can go 25, 30 miles an hour, whereas the former two, I believe the maximum
Yeah.
cutoff speed is 20 miles an
And
hour.
it's the torque too.
Yeah.
So if you have the throttle only, it's just
Basically
torquey as a
a-
two-stroke motorcycle.
Yeah.
You know, I've been on all three. But I think the first level, I mean, because of where it is, I guess what I'm saying is we're basically telling people, hey, you can't ride your bike up the prospect if you have an e-bike, because once you get there, you can't use it. You know, which would be kind of the downside of like, part of the beauty of, I guess, having an e-bike would be that you can actually get to a place like that without driving. And then you can ride your bicycle or go for a run.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you can ride your e-bike all the way out there and then go running or walking or birding, whatever it is, and not bring a vehicle. So that would be the downside.
You could get to the parking lot legally without
That's true.
infringing on this,
Right.
because
that's true.
you're on class 6 and then
Yeah.
you're on that.
So you get
So,
to the top of Paul's Ledge.
Well, if you went past the gate to go up to Hall's Ledge, that's gated.
right.
Even though it's class 6, it's gated as non-motorized. But your recommendation here is to do the class 1, class 2.
At least the class 1, the pedal assist only.
Okay, pedal
Only
assist.
because I felt like that's what we expected would be
And that gets to Mike's question.
Yeah, I think
popular
that-
client base, people, like people we know. I know people in town who have those bikes, and it just seems weird that would be like, well, you can ride up there, but you can't.
And you can use a class 2 only in a pedal assist mode.
Right, which would be tough though. It was,
No, it's easy. I mean, my wife does it all the time.
Right, but if you can check if somebody's like, wait,
Yeah.
are you actually?
Right. And there is a place in town now that rents e-bikes, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I mean, I think,
Yeah. I mean, I was
I'm pretty sure the
Ski the Whites
Ski the
said
Whites, yeah.
Okay.
they rent e-bikes. And
I think
know
those must be class 2 when I watched people.
the pedal assist, as far as I know, maybe you can do something. I've only ridden one around enough to where I was pedaling it.
Okay, so you're recommending just the pedal assist?
I would, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I would. I don't even like to say the word because I'm like not an e-bike person, but I just feel like
Yeah. But I think we do need to create a space for people
Yeah.
like the Peter Miniches in the world who it's like, yeah, I mean, I want to be able to create a space for you to still enjoy this area, but
Right.
it's a thin line, right? 'Cause
So could you go up a trail on that?
Well, the irony is most people go up Bog Brook, and once you cross the boundary there, essentially,
Oh, right, yeah.
it's illegal.
Yeah.
Right.
But somebody can still have that on, like my wife could use hers totally without
Mhm.
just turn the battery.
So people can't
Yeah.
ride an e-bike on Robert Road currently? Did we say? Is that?
That's my interpretation of where the rules are right now.
Huh.
I mean,
No,
they
I
did
don't
run into
know.
a problem on the forest because handicapped people were arguing to get into wilderness areas using ATVs,
Right.
because I was quote handicapped.
Right.
And it was a way, In fact, when they were trying to put the snowmobile trail up over Perkins Notch, they ended up, until that became a wilderness area, they were using that as the Easter Seal ride, which was a clever strategy, but it didn't work.
Well, maybe we do just present this that we're going to move forward as the Forest Service does. I mean, I have friends who have e-bikes who are full-on mountain bike, genies. I don't like the idea of it myself, but I know those guys ride their bikes. I just figured, you must be able to ride an e-bike like that on like Robert Road or those kinds of places already, because I know where some people go. Maybe everything they're doing is not.
I don't think there's much enforcement going on. But,
I don't.
Was it an enforcement question or a gray area question? Because when we discussed this last time.
It's not a gray area. I did check with the Forest Service.
That they have a stated policy?
Yeah, if you go onto their websites right now, and they're going through the throes of trying to figure out what they're doing and not doing. But like right now for handicapped, in theory, you can't use a motorized wheelchair on those. Once you pass the gate, because it says non-motorized, in theory, you can't use a motorized wheelchair is the interpretation when I asked the Forest Service.
What do you guys think?
I would personally be in favor of allowing it at some defined level for people with mobility issues. If at some point, I don't know if there's a way to include language that if at some point the Forest Service makes it clear that it's causing problems on their abutting property, that we reconsider. But for the time being, I imagine folks that...
It's a nasty climb up to Lake Vista, which is totally on Prospect Farm.
Yeah, I imagine that...
And an assist would help people. You gotta be pretty fit to...
Oh, I know people are riding those e-bikes up to haul sledge. Flat out, that happens.
Yeah.
Right? Just because I know people come up and say, oh my gosh, you rode an e-bike up to haul sledge. It's not like they don't know they're doing anything wrong. I don't even know if I knew they were, but it's, they're leaving from...
Well, they're not necessarily wrong because they're totally on Prospect Farmland right now. They're
So
not on
they're-
Forest Service land.
You can tell just from looking at the trail. I ran up yesterday. I was like, this is not just foot traffic. This is, firm. It's getting burned in.
Yeah.
So
And that actually could
It
be
isn't a bad
erosion.
thing. It's the trail. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
All the network looks fantastic right now.
So what if you did the low level, but you didn't have to confine it just to handicap?
Well, that's what Mike is suggesting because otherwise how are you determining?
Yeah, I was the same. I was just thinking that right now, if you have the lowest level e-bike, you're riding those things on, so I guess it's open for traffic regardless. Robert Road's closed, but like Town Hall Road, if you get to that gated section that brings you up to that pond, I guess technically you're not able to ride your e-bike up there. I never thought about that.
So I'll change the handicap to the class 1 for the next version.
I do have a couple other things on the bike one, just because it's been so dry, and I've been out in Prospect quite a bit. And I'm just wondering, with the interest in being able to build additional trails out there at some point, not just in this, not that there's another section called like multi-use, but because this is the biking part, and any multi-use trail that I'd be interested would potentially have a bicycle on it. And I totally recognize that there is a lot of wet areas in there, and steep and just nasty. But there's a couple sections that have old skid roads and just old pathways that are just really interesting. Some of it looks like it's old pasture and stone walls and things, and it just seems like there would be the ability to put in some sort of a switchback trail for running, and could be used for snowshoeing in the winter as well, but possibly bicycles. Partly because I just feel like it's something we're really lacking in town.
What I had here, and you can probably catch it in the last sentence here, is mountain biking off of recognized and improved trail systems is not permitted.
So we
If
could,
somebody came forward and requested to develop it, then
okay,
that would become an improvement.
cool,
But what it is saying here is we don't want you just
right.
finding how, where, when you can go anywhere
Right.
on a mountain bike.
I'm totally on
Yeah.
board. That basically
So-
satisfies my,
Yeah,
I just didn't want to like, be like, oh, well now you get to go back to battle backwards and be like, see, you said you weren't gonna do this, and now you want to.
but for that to happen, somebody would have to come forward with a
Absolutely.
plan. and
Yeah.
that's what's gonna
Yeah.
happen.
And-
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Do we need to address fat bikes at all in the winter? Like, do we need to put something?
Fat tire,
Yeah, like the fat tire bikes.
that's a good point, and I didn't.
Wouldn't that fall under Jackson Ski Touring
Yeah.
though?
Yeah, I mean, it gets funky again because, you know, the minute you move over onto the Forest Service land, Jackson Ski Touring actually has to pay a special use just like Attitash does or Wildcat does, and they get certain rights. So they have the ability to say no the minute you leave. And again, the bulk of that traffic is Bob Brook Trail because that's the one that is most doable by the largest segment of the population. You get far less going up, even skiers far less going up to
Oh, yeah.
the Orchard because it's a nasty climb, and you got to be a fairly decent skier to come back down
Yeah.
and still be in one piece when you come back down. And similar with quail, which is kind of nice and rolling, but you hardly start on the quail and you're off to Prospect Farm and you're on.
Right.
So again, but fat tire bikes is a good point that's totally missing here.
Guess you can always come down from Wildcat.
Yeah.
No, you can't, because that trail is actually a special use permit with a.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
it gets done. People do drop in from Wildcat Mountain.
The other thing I was gonna say, and I don't know enough about biking up there to know this or not, is do we need to think about like, hey, like, don't use a bike between these months when the ground, like, when it's really wet, like,
Yeah.
no biking not permitted between,
Common sense.
April in April and May or something like that, like, I didn't know if that was something, I don't really know that area well enough to know, like,
No,
when it's good to
I
get
know.
a bike again, but.
I agree. I think with today's climate, you can't put dates on things anymore because it's just not always applicable. You close off a period, and that's like the driest month of the year, and then it rains all, June, and then it's wet. But, so maybe just a common sense, like, I don't know what the word is, like maybe a little. I don't know.
Well, I'm sure there's like little thumbs, right? Where if you
Yeah, I mean, it's
if
just-
this is happening, you should not be biking, right?
Right.
And it is, you can bike, for example, on Bob Brook, pretty much even when it's pretty wet,
Right.
Right.
because it's built for that.
Yeah.
But if you went up Hall's Ledge, it's not.
No.
You'd start to rut that up
Oh, yeah.
and start to cause problems.
Yeah, maybe just a practice, a common sense, which could go true for running and hiking too.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's, I love both. But
Right. Yeah, I mean,
sometimes I'm disappointed with what I see people do when they're hiking as I'm carrying my bike across something.
Yeah.
Going like,
So,
running across
because what we're really talking about here is the Hall's Ledge Trail, so I'll try to insert some language about no biking during mud season.
Mhm. I think that makes sense.
I think it does, because that is steep enough that
Yeah.
mountain bikes can start to, particularly if you have high volume use.
Well, you know what, being one who's definitely ridden around here a lot, is it's actually the gravel bikes right now that I find are doing more of the damage than the mountain bikes, because for whatever reason, mountain biking is just not very good. So you tend to see it once, you're like, oh, that wasn't that good. The gravel bike, your expectation is just like, oh, whatever, I'm on
Yeah.
a gravel bike.
But those are the bikes now you're seeing leaving the tracks in places that you just go.
What do the tires look like?
They're-
Are they
they're-
That's just a slightly
They're-
wider road bike tire. It's basically a road bike. We would have called it cyclocross bike years ago, but now it's a popular way of getting around. So, you're covering long distances on mediocre trail, and those bikes, if you're not smart, they leave quite a rut. But you don't really think of it the same, but I've seen so much of it this year that, half the time I'm like, oh, everybody's gonna think it's me.
Yeah, the fat tires do the least damage.
Yeah, so that's it. I'm like, you get the fat bike
They're
out
hard as
there.
hell to, because there's so much friction, but.
Yeah, the fat bike like burns in this beautiful, looks like it's foot traffic, but
the gravel bike has to be really quite firm and quite nice
So
for
if
it.
it's a lot of ruts.
They leave
Leave
ruts,
track.
and people tend to just go on subpar terrain because you don't mind carrying the bike because it's part of the idea. You know, it's like, it's not a go everywhere bike, it's sort of a go everywhere till you get stopped and then you just carry
Figure
it.
it out.
Mountain biking, you kind of charge through things, but then you think about the maintenance on it, it's muddy, it's expensive to upkeep. Gravel bikes are less expensive to sort of.
Let me see if I can summarize, just in the interest of time here. Change the next version on e-bikes to just the class 1. No fat tire bikes on winter on groomed trails. And no biking during the mud season. And if a lawyer said, well, what do you mean by mud season? We might use the town's road closure as the,
Or any other season where it's excessively wet.
yeah.
No, you want this to be like common.
But as you know, as a lawyer, if it's vague, it's hard to deal with it, yeah.
I think also to Brian's point, it could be helpful to clarify that last sentence and just say something like mountain biking off of recognized and either current or future approved trail systems is not permitted. Just because I think that when I first read that, I took it to mean any existing trails where it's currently approved to ride a mountain bike, and I didn't interpret it as additional trail systems could be approved. But I think there was a fair amount of support for that in the survey, for the idea of potentially a mountain bike trail.
Yeah,
I support that being an option in the future.
I don't know if I would support having a seasonal closure specific to mountain biking, but maybe as a subset in our signage, or just raising awareness of wet season travel, because that's putting a lot of burden on 4 people in town versus 50 indiscriminate hikers who, build braided trails.
I have to agree with that. I don't think we should have a window time when it's not open. I think the usage is so limited. The people who are going there to go ride an easy ride, they're not going to ride if it's wet because they're just not going to like it. It's for the. I think education instead of a closure makes sense because it is so. It's just not a place you want. Right off the bat, you get in there, you're like, this is terrible. I'm out of here.
Okay, so
Yeah, I think we should work on education.
use education and not a timeline.
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
timeline. Okay.
The area
Well,
is just too
it's
great.
applicable to all use groups, so.
Yeah,
Sure.
right. I think that's wise.
Okay. Moving on, in the interest of time again, overnight use and camping. The current policy is no camping's allowed up there. That is a town ordinance, and essentially our recommendation is to continue that. The exception is, I believe that if there's like a Boy Scout troop or something that makes that request to a selectman, they do have the option of if there's a school trip or something. So this is no change from what's there. The recommendation is as is. All in agreement on that?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to rush this too fast, but hunting. Hunting has always been allowed, recognized, both here and on the National Forest. I did look up the National Forest policy, which is no shooting from a rota trail or across a rota trail. So essentially that seemed like common sense to me. So this basically says hunting is still permitted, but there's no shooting from or across a trail. That gets a little dicey because I'm sure if you're standing here and you saw a deer there, you might shoot across a trail and not even know you're doing it, but I don't know how else to write this language. It does say target practicing is not permitted. I don't think we want the AR folks up there hammering away, so this would just clarify that kind of thing. Bear baiting, I've recommended not be permitted. There's pros and cons to it, but I think with a high recreational use up there, this is not the place for bear baiting.
No, people are walking their dogs up there.
What about,
Yeah.
But what about hunting with dogs? That's kind of freaky. Have you ever seen them with radio collars?
Yeah, the bears, yeah.
No.
Well, rabbit hunters use dogs very frequently as well. Usually if they're with a dog, they're gonna be in and out of Prospect Farm in minutes because
Yeah,
that's
that's true.
just how it
But
happens.
they lose track of the dogs because that's
Yeah.
why the radio collars.
My feeling here is, let's not over-regulate,
Yeah.
but bear baiting is, and actually to put out bear baiting, I believe you need the permission of the landowner to be
You
able
do.
to actually
You
even
do.
do that. So this is essentially, and it is recognizing, even though it's not, is hunters are not allowed to use the Valentine property. Because that parking lot is on Valentine's property and the rest of his land is posted as no hunting.
Mhm.
Again, to try to reinforce
But
it.
if you're not hunting on Valentine's property, how does that, have you talked to him about this?
No, but his land
Parking
is,
for hunters?
his land is posted as no hunting.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the hunter parks his car and walks up the road. He's not hunting on Valentine's property.
Well, he's starting his hunt on Valentine's property by putting his car in that Valentine parking lot.
That's not hunting.
If he walks out,
Parking is not hunting.
yeah, but if he walks out of there with his gun, he is.
Right, what if he comes back with the animal
Yeah.
shot?
Well,
If somebody's gonna hunt, they should drive up to the
Okay.
cinema parking lot.
I just find that you're on the edge there. Have you talked to him?
We can double check with him, but knowing
Yeah.
how he's posted his land, quite frankly, I think if hunters started working out of there, we would just go from bad to worse in the relationship there for everybody.
Well, really, a hunter would want to drive in as far as he could. and
Right.
park
Yeah,
up in-
I mean, to be honest, the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation could take they could take the position that no hunters can use this parking lot.
Mhm.
Because it's incomparable use.
Well, Jackson's rights to use that and the public's right is based on winter, not summer. Valentine has not closed it off to the summer, but he could at any time if he so desired.
Right, we used to be told that it wasn't for the summer. park,
Yeah,
because he was
and
in-
Jackson does not advertise that it's
Right.
there. That's up to,
Yeah,
he's accepted that use in an informal way, but the Ski Touring Foundation cannot give permission for the summer because that's not what their uses are. I saw this as an educational way of not having hunters create a problem for hunters by starting to hunt out of there. Because the only thing they legally could do is then walk up the Class 6 road, which they legally could do, but they couldn't shoot until they couldn't shoot at anything until they got up onto Prospect Farm land. Otherwise, they're illegal because they're hunting on posted land. That's why having somebody walk up that road to camp out with a gun or up Marsh Brook with a gun is problematic
from a legal standpoint.
from a legal, yeah.
I'm not sure at what point you're hunting, like, Dick says you're not hunting till you shot something. You're hunting as soon as
No.
When
you
you're
say-
walking with a
so
loaded
you'll have,
gun,
Yeah, if your
gun
gun's
over your
loaded, you're hunting.
you're hunting,
You
yeah.
could- I
And
think-
most people after they get out of their
So then
car.
you don't need a legal definition because that's exactly what you guys all agreed.
Right, like, you can, just like you can travel to a hunting site before it's dusk, dawn to dawn, dusk roll, but your gun, I believe, has to not
Be
be
empty.
loaded, because otherwise you technically could.
Except the way that the crazy legislation in New Hampshire now.
Right, I can't even, right, you get it.
You can walk around with an AR loaded and you're not hunting.
It's true.
Um, It's like going shopping in Hannaford's the other day, guys, and they with a loaded pistol. It's like, Jesus,
Ah,
is this necessary?
Making a point.
Are we okay with this?
Yeah, I wish that we could figure out a good way to let people know when hunting season is. 'Cause
Well, rabbit
that is-
season goes into March.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one, right? Then you get spring and fall turkey,
Right.
so that gets
Yeah.
Or
clever.
at least just that I'm for a while I feel like we just need to have a sign. Maybe it's part of the new kiosk sign. It's just like, during hunting season, please have orange on or something
What
like
if
that.
we have something where you just says, hey, if you want to know the hunting season, just boop, there's the info. Just
My observation is during deer season, most people up there, their dogs got a little orange on them, and Not all the hikers, but a good number of them do have orange on. And fortunately, those trails are pretty straight, the roads, so the line of sight is decent. It's not like,
Yeah, there hasn't been an issue, and I feel like most hunters that I see out there recognize that they're kind of in an area that they could be overrun at any point by people. And
Yeah.
it's just part of how you almost like, they're trying to get out of the Prospect Farm.
yeah.
So, I mean, the ones that I know who hunt out that way, it's really about getting out.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we can pop up at any point, be loud.
Again, we have to think in terms of when you start putting these regulations on the kiosk. You don't want to have too much language there, or you lose the effectiveness of the kiosk in doing what it needs to. That's a personal decision on how and when people. We're just going to make a recommendation, particularly during deer season, which is the I think it's hiking, walking, snowshoeing, and pets. This policy basically says, when the roads and trails are not groomed for XC skiing, then hiking, walking, and exercising pets is permitted. When the trails and roads are groomed for XC skiing, then walking and microspikes on the groomed trails are not prevented to prevent dangerous post holing for XC skiers. Snowshoes are permitted adjacent to the groomed track. So this is not saying that you can't go out there. It's just
Make your own trail.
have something so you're not destroying the groomed track. And dogs under control of the owner or on a leash are permitted year-round, and with the exception of any special events like an XC ski race when safety concerns are involved. And the only time that there's been a race up there is when there was no snow and there was a scheduled race here and they got permission to run it up there. And the historic viewpoints and cellar holes designated on the map should be kept open and maintained, because that's part of the...
Why is that sentence in this section?
That's a good question.
Why, I think it should be in the forestry plan, because that's where it would be applicable. And I mean, the sentiment is correct, I have no
Yeah.
problem with it.
It's a good
But
point.
why it's in the section on hiking and snowshoeing, I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that too.
The only reason I put it there, but it doesn't mean that it should stay there, is predominantly people would hike. It's an activity that's involved with hiking to them.
Yeah.
So that's why I put it here. But
Well, keeping the viewpoints open and the cellar holes is going to be the forestry plan, so.
yep, that's easy to move over there.
This maybe doesn't matter at all, but Microspike is a Cajula brand name. Should we keep that, or should we change that to a more generic traction or something? I don't know if that matters at all, but
Yeah.
Microspike is a brand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everyone understands
It's
that.
like
means,
Kleenex, right, at this
At
point.
At this point, is it like Kleenex?
It is.
Yeah.
Most people,
I just refer to them as microspikes.
most
It
people
doesn't
do,
matter.
they'll be like, oh, do I have to bring micro spikes?
I just
Or
call them-
spikes?
Yeah, I just call them spikes.
Yeah, maybe just call them spikes.
Spikes, traction.
Someone's like, these aren't spikes, these are studs.
Yeah.
Well, either way, if you're walking with them or without them, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, could you just say that foot travel is only permitted with snowshoes adjacent to groomed trail
Right.
tracks, rather than specifying what's not allowed? And
Right,
just
so you
say,
could say, I'm just wearing crampon.
And just strike, and the microspikes, just strike that.
Yeah, I think just say.
Just call it walking.
Walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yep. XC skiing, we finished that section. XC skiing on designated groomed trails should be allowed and continue through a use agreement with the Ski Touring Foundation. JSTF will provide the winter parking, general trail maintenance, grooming, and ski patrol. And this is just echoing what the current agreement is. A Jackson pass is required on the groomed trails or by users of the Jackson Valentine parking lot during the snow season, okay? Jackson residents skiing or snowshoeing on just the Prospect Farm properties may get a free pass from Jackson, but it is limited only to the Prospect Farm portion. And that's the way the agreement is written now. Because once they move on to the Forest Service land, Jackson can't give away it for free,
And you have a special use permit
and it has a special use permit, that's
that you
correct.
pay for.
Which is paid for, and,
Mhm.
yeah. And it's no different, Wildcat can't just say, well, you're from Jackson, I'll give you free passes because I like you. That's actually not legal in the way that those special use permits are written. At least that's my understanding. And otherwise, the Jackson ski pass is required to access the grooming trails on the private properties in White Mountain National Forest. And skiing with a dog is permitted. That's,
Oh, should we put,
$8.
permitted on designated trails? Because there are trails up there that you can't. Tom and I learned that the hard way a couple years ago. There's actually, technically,
you mean skiing with a dog?
skiing with a dog, because you can't actually, technically you're not allowed to go up to Hall's Ledge with a dog.
Right, yeah.
Because it's just boggy, it's just the ones with the handprints.
Yeah, yeah,
The
paw
paw
prints.
prints, yeah, not handprints, yeah, paw prints.
Yeah. That's an interesting challenge because the way that the agreement is written, I believe that legally you could, but Jackson's policy is, the ski touring is no, for the simple reason that skiers coming down and dogs going up
Yeah,
it's a bad mix.
yeah.
It's a safety issue is what it is. So, yeah, we could put in here dogs above the quail trail not permitted.
I would just put on undesignated trails, right? Skiing with dogs permitted on designated trails.
Well, those are designated
Well,
trails.
dog designated trail. I
Oh,
guess.
yeah, sorry, yeah, dog designated, oh, yeah, that's confusing, yeah.
Okay, so change that to on dog designated.
So that way, in case if ski touring changes it later on, and it's like, it's not Boggy Brook anymore, now it's this one that you take dogs on.
Well, now it sounds like the dogs are designated.
Right now,
as
the
top
quail and the
trails.
boggy brook should be the dog ones because they're, also there's a decent line of sight, which is the other critical thing in skier dog interactions. But there was high demand for dogs, and I know that people in town didn't want to be told during the winter they couldn't take their dogs out there.
Yeah.
And the same is true actually with the properties behind the library as well. That is dog permissible again as part of that agreement. Okay. Any others on this? Noise, open fires, litter, and fireworks. Essentially, this is just adopting the town's ordinances.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
So people smoke up there, cigarettes? Think of fires and think of balls. Do you have that ordinance? Or not?
You're testing my,
I know.
Recall.
There was the loophole for Prospect Farm for tobacco use.
yes, I think you're correct.
Yeah, I think Pearlie came up with the scenario that, some hunter
Has a
smoking his
cigar.
pipe,
Yeah.
he's outdoors, he's not offending anybody.
Until he drops his butt.
I don't think I've ever seen anybody smoking up there, but,
But, I mean, that's the scenario that could be.
It's the only place I can smoke my cigarettes. Straight to
Gotcha,
Prospect.
vegan.
Yeah.
so, but I think, Ben, your memory is correct, that the exception is, because the language, I think, says no on public parks and town buildings. And of course,
I think it was town property, parks, with the
Yeah.
exception of Prospect Farm is named as the one exception, so.
yes, and I mean, it is ironic because Prospect Farm was donated as a public park, but it was accepted by the town as a recreation ground. So I've always interpreted that the town never accepted it as a public park. Because normally you think of public parks kind of like where the ball field is or something, but of course then you could think of national parks. But it gets fuzzy as to, because some regulations pertain to parks and some don't. It's not a town forest, because town forests are normally set aside for forestry first and others second. When I wrote this, I sort of took it as the intention of her and then the town's acceptance as a recreation ground as opposed to, we're calling this a town park. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but that was,
And they carved out the exception.
yeah. Okay, is there any missing in this section? Because then I'll go to, these would become voted policies at some point, which would then be, this is the formal rules and regs or whatever. And I don't know whether we call these rules or policy. Policy tends to be lighter than rules it might be.
Policy is guidance, maybe?
Yeah, some of these are rules and some of these are policies, so we might want to sharpen that up at the next version as to which is which.
Because I don't think you actually need to vote on policies.
Yeah, I think,
Recommendations, right?
Right.
but some of these we definitely want as, these are the rules that you post up there, regulations, whatever you want to call them. So next round, we can kind of differentiate. Okay, now I put in 3 recommendations here. The first was, the town right now with the Ski Touring Foundation has 5-year and then it gets renewed, 5-year, it gets renewed. When I look at how it's being operated up there, it's kind of, there's money efficiencies and time efficiencies that might be worked out with the Ski Touring Foundation. And I think it's worth opening up a negotiation with the Ski Touring Foundation. Let me give you a quick example. The town plows to the turnaround that's above Joni White's house. Then Jackson pays to have somebody come up and plow the rest in the parking lot and sand it. The town guy is almost there. Conversely, the Ski Touring Foundation has people come down and clear the trails and mow, but the town hires somebody to mow the orchard and to mow the scenic view, etc. But Jackson is already up there doing it, and the town is hiring somebody else. There may be opportunities for quid pro quo here, where Jackson does some of those and the town does some of those, and they both come out whole within the current situation where you're doing the mix and match. I'm not proposing what that quid pro quo is, but I'm recommending that those discussions and negotiations should be advanced. And it may be that in the end, the status quo is there, but it just struck me that there's a number of inefficiencies that are happening here that might work out for both entities.
Makes sense to me.
And this just triggers the discussion. It's not saying what the outcome is. And the second is just reinforcing that the town should continue its general and corporate MOUs with White Mountain National Forest relative to access roads and summer parking lots. It's just a recommendation that we would be blessing the more or less generally positive relationship that.
Have you reviewed those MOUs?
I've looked at some of them, yeah. I mean, as I say, the parking lot that when we moved with Ballantyne, it ended up that the Forest Service paid to have it built, that 6-car parking lot. But it was not built, even though 700 feet further down, it was actually more appropriate to have it on National Forest land than Prospect Farm, but that's because of the Stump Dump. And Dick, I don't know how much history you had as a selectman and those MOUs, but my read of them was, like Boggy Brook and Quail, which were Forest Service access roads that kind of served logging for both Jackson and the forest. And the spur, when you go up to the Orchard Trail, the spur to the right is predominantly on Prospect farmland, but and many people ski out there and back and forth, so it's been used for recreation purposes. But it was built to service forestry on the National Forest land. Then the third recommendation that I came up with is, and this is something we've discussed, is to have the town or the Conservation Commission approach Lyons to see whether he would be willing, interested in selling at fair market value, to have that as an addition onto Prospect Farm. And my understanding right now is the Conservation Commission has the Conservation Fund, which is generated from when the current use tax, when land is taken out. There's roughly 50 some odd, maybe 60,000 in that right now. And there should be another 7,000 or so going into it, because the Ski Touring Foundation did sell the last lot that it has, and it took it out of current use. And when it's taken out, the tax on that should be roughly 14,000, of which half goes to the town's budget and half goes into this conservation fund that is controlled by this commission, and its purpose is for like land acquisitions. So if they approach Lions, it's not like they would be approaching Lions with, where's the money? There is a big chunk of money that exists for exactly this kind of purpose. And now whether, I mean, when I looked up on the appraised tax value of Lions property, it was in the 50 some odd thousand, because it is a landlocked parcel. There's not a lot that can be done with it. If it was added to Prospect Farm, the ability to add more trails, et cetera, and loops is good. And some of it would go on to National Forest. So it's one of those things, if Lyons is interested, we would move forward. If he's not interested,
Maybe be interested in conservation easement. You know, he's not interested in the fee.
yeah, I mean, Jackson has approached him and he said, yeah, you can build trails here, but the ski touring is hesitant to build trails today because they're expensive to build. That's fairly wet property. I mean, I've hiked up through it. Good pieces of it are. He's walked it pretty intensively. But if you walked up through it, you know what I mean. It's up to him, but he's told the Ski Touring Foundation if you want to build some trails, yeah, he'd be amenable to it. But the problem is if they build it and then he sells it to somebody else and
Well, that's
says,
why you
no,
have to get a conservation easement or something like that.
or a trail easement or whatever.
Yeah.
But it would be a good addition, and it would, there's been controversy between that owner or former owners and the town before about what could or couldn't be, and it almost went to Superior Court. And I don't know what he's going to do with that property in the future outside of logging it, which it's already been logged pretty intensively, but it's his land, his decision. This would just simply make the recommendation to approach him, and if there's something that works, great. If not, then
You don't know if you don't ask.
right.
That's the easiest thing to do is,
Yeah,
But this is a logical acquisition to Prospect Farm. It's not
yeah.
100 acres just out in the middle of nowhere.
No.
Well, it is, but it's relevant to Prospect.
It is
Farm.
relevant, and it would enhance what you could do with Prospect Farm.
Definitely.
And ironically, when Baker bought that, for some reason, she never ended up buying that 100-acre parcel. She put together a couple parcels. When you read back through, I think it was Garland did the history or whatever on that, but it was a different owner, and they were not able to acquire that property at that time. And I don't know if there's other recommendations, but these aren't regulations or policies. They're just
The only one that I thought of, and maybe this is inherent in this document, and I'm not going to be offended if we don't do this, but I didn't know if we wanted to put something just in there about, because I kind of saw this as like a broader pitch, and just like a quick thing about how the Conservation Commission recommends to the town that any modifications, improvements, etc., from here on out, we should be looking to effects of climate change, essentially. So like if we're building any bridges, any roads, any trails, we shouldn't be thinking about historical data, but like how we need to be ramping up to the kind of the change that might be happening. So like if ski touring's like, hey, we're gonna put a trail here, like, is it best sited to capture the most amount of snow, and like those sort of things. Like, is this bridge really a once in 1,000-year storm, once in 100-year storm? Like what sort of things
Right.
So I didn't know if we wanted to recommend to the town, like, hey, like, we really should be thinking about, it's gonna be changing up there, how do we mitigate that
I
now?
think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I just scribbled down all trails, roads, et cetera, would be built to best management practices, taking into consideration climate change.
Excellent.
Some language.
Yeah, just something like that.
Wish they did that everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Versus just rebuilding the exact same thing
Slip
over and over
the-
again.
the seams-
Well,
seams
let me suggest, because, this all got dropped at, at 8 a.m. this morning on your email, which is not entirely fair, is I will take these, try to update these. I'm taking off tomorrow. As I say, I'm going backpacking for a while, so when I come back, I will try to update this, send it out again, and then it'll give you some time to also, geez, I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
No,
I have some different thoughts, but,
it's excellent.
and then maybe we can get a little bit closer to closure at the next meeting on this, would be my suggestion. I just looked at tonight as a general discussion.
I think that was great.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting that together. That was really, really helpful.
And also, this is very helpful for me personally to have a hard copy that I can keep going back to,
Yeah.
think about it, and then go right back there, and I can make my notes on it.
But, if you can in the next week or two, take a second look and email me any suggested changes. Let's not worry about grammar and that stuff at this point. But if you catch some, as I say, I already know I get an H-I-J-K and then B. Some of that stuff is there. I got that after I was moving them around. But if you, do send those to me, then I can try to get an updated version for the next meeting.
It sounds good. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's almost 8.
So Jeff, let's hammer this out.
I'll try to quickly just touch on a couple other things. I just did want to note that Tim Nolan let me know, I haven't been up to Prospect Farm recently actually, so Tim Nolan let me know they did paint the boundaries up there this spring. I don't know if anyone has seen that themselves.
I haven't, but I wanted to follow the exact lines, and it's good to know he's done it. because
Yeah.
I took a look.
Yeah, and I believe he was paid for that, so we used the Baker Trust for that. Let's see, we obviously have the sign for the kiosk at this point. Mike, I don't know if you want to take
I
that
kinda wanna
with
see
you.
it,
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
I think that makes
Oh, no, that's fine.
I put it in like safekeeping and then.
I would not have gotten to come here to get it. so.
and we did get funds approved to construct a kiosk and install a kiosk for that. I did talk to a contractor who is interested, but right now is extremely busy and basically said that he could get it done before the end of the season. But if we want to look into other options, I'm okay with that. Otherwise, Matt Coughlin with Recon Trail Design, Mike, you've worked with him.
Oh, yeah.
He's doing some of the kiosks at Pine Hill. So I don't know if we need to take a vote on that.
Open it up.
Yeah, I do want to open it up. Just want to make sure I don't like what we work on. I don't know where
Is everyone okay with it basically being done before the end of the season and not right away? At one point, we talked about getting it done by Memorial Day, and
If we get it done, then we can get it done.
yeah, okay,
We didn't say which year.
right, exactly.
And if you find
2022.
somebody to do it, you can't, that's all.
Yeah, okay. And we talked about doing the workday in the fall with the sod, so we'll push that off a bit. I think that makes sense. Although we have gotten some rain recently, I think probably waiting cooler weather and more.
Transplanting in mid-July is not exactly.
Oh my God, for one thing, you'd be getting tickets from the police, parking, moved up the parking,
Which raises the question as to why we did that the last 2 years, but here we are.
Well, one thing I did notice, and I think the Conservation Commission had made a recommendation, and it got, by the time it got through the selectmen, it got changed, but, a lot of non-resident taxpayers are upset that they can't access the 3 specify Jackson because it says Jackson residents only. Like Garland, who actually helped get the Jackson Falls, you know, they were instrumental in some of that effort to get it in Wild and Scenic, can't park at the Jackson. Even though they own property there, but they're not residents of Jackson. And when I go by, that is not used very much by Jackson residents.
On Sunday,
There were 2 Massachusetts cars parked in today.
Yeah, I saw that today.
I was like, that's
But-
funny.
on Sunday, there were 2 New Hampshire cars and I parked right
Yeah.
between them. That was the only one that had the
I
pass.
always thought it was wrong to not allow, it should be for Jackson taxpayers, not just Jackson
Well, I
residents.
think Barbara's point was though, there are all these other spaces. And those would be the only spaces that would be there if we had a petition. for
Yeah,
the trees for
I'm
the-
just giving my own personal observation that there's a great deal of the time, there's no Jackson cars parked there. They're open and empty.
But I think it's early yet, so let's see what happens.
But I think it's something to monitor and
Yes.
make a recommendation to make that modification. I do feel bad about people who pay taxes here and get 0, of which,
They did not make it easy to get this thing out.
You sure there's anything in there?
What's that?
Real quick, I just wanted to mention, I noticed last week there's a Wild and Scenic Rivers grant opportunity. The deadline for the application is July 28th, which doesn't leave a lot of time. But, and maybe Mike, you and I can just talk about this offline, but it does talk about providing funding for a water quality monitoring program.
Oh, awesome.
$5,000 to $10,000, essentially to get a program like that started.
Okay.
And so, if you want to talk about it, I don't know if Tin Mountain, I think it's for 501c3 nonprofits.
We
not for-
like money, we like
Yeah,
$10,000.
So I'd be happy to help with an application for that. And I don't know if it would make sense for the Conservation Commission to write a letter of support and whether we should vote to allow me or anyone else to do that on behalf of the Conservation Commission. It's due July 28th, so tonight would be the night to do it.
I will make a motion that Jeff, representing the Conservation Commission, move ahead with a grant application for water quality monitoring.
Great. Do we have a second? Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Great. So Mike, maybe we can chat. And then there was an after the fact wetlands impact permit submitted. We had initially gotten a minimum impact wetlands permit. Some work was done. It's right off of Route 16 as you're going into Pinkham Notch. I think it's owned by the Farrells, and this application was submitted by Greg Howard, wetland scientist, and so he was working with them. Sounded like they did some work before they actually had the permit in hand. I haven't seen the extent of the impact, and I haven't really had a chance to review this permit, but I know we do have a wetland subcommittee, and so Brian, it looked like you had a chance to take a look at it.
Yeah.
I don't think we actually signed this type of permit.
No, we don't.
We would have the opportunity to extend the comment period or to provide comments if we want to, so. Do you want to take, well, actually, I think we need to leave this here because this needs to be sent in, but I think I can get an electronic version if you want to review it.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I don't have much to say. It seems it's like one of those weird. It's like.
I was like terrified I was gonna say
yeah,
that.
I don't know that we have
We covered the Jackson Falls.
a lot of
That looks great.
influence.
Yeah.
That looks
So-
great.
That looks really good.
So I think that's it as far as the main points on the agenda go. Anyone else have anything to discuss?
That's what the sign looks like.
Great.
I'm still terrified that there's a spelling error that I can't see.
Oh.
I think it's so funny to get the bench on there.
Yeah.
It's good, simple.
Simple, clean,
Yeah.
right?
Nice.
Stickers all over that thing.
Stickers all over it, that's right.
That's right.
Right there.
Gotta get one for the Jackson Country.
Chuck Martin.
Does it show rapids? Is that what that's about?
Falls.
Little rapids?
Yeah.
That's so cute.
Yeah. Way to go, that's good work.
Yeah.
That's good work.
That's nice.
Mike, are you gonna hold on to that?
I can, I don't know, unless you want to.
Not particularly. but-
Yeah, I'll show it somewhere. I'll probably take it to work, actually.
Okay.
Show and tell.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that's it, unless anyone else has anything.
So we're running out of daylight.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. For a second. Okay, thanks Pam. All those in favor?
All right.